Today we're going to be working with complex numbers. So you're going to need out your 4-7 yellow note sheet to take some notes on it. So first of all, I provided you with some notes on there. So the imaginary unit there is equal to I. And we like I's in math here because you can't take the square root of a negative number and get a real number, but we like to be able to hold that value um, and be able to use it. But with this, when we don't, um, when we have a square root of a negative number, basically we usually say, oh, that can't be done, and we can't do anything else with it. But if we have the square root of -1 equaling the value of I there, we can go ahead and continue to do further computations. So in math, we like to use those. And then when we've also got I squared is equal to -1. So the square root of -5 there can be broken down as the square root of -1 times the square root of 5. And then the square root of -1 can be replaced, can be substituted in there for, we can substitute I there in for the square root of -1. And so we get I times the square root of 5. So let's actually do some examples of those. We're going to simplify each number using the imaginary number I. So I is equal to the square root of -1. So whenever we get a square root of negative number there, we can replace the negative portion there with I. So if I were to break down the square root of -25, I'm going to say that's the square root of -1 times the square root of 25. Well, the square root of -1 has a value of I, and the square root of 25 has a value of 5. So I just write my number first. I'm going to write that as 5I. And then part B there, we have the square root of -81. I'm going to break that down. Square root of -81 is the same thing as the square root of -1 times the square root of 81. Well, the square root of -1 there has a value of I, and the square root of 81 is 9. We always write a number first and a variable there last, so we're going to put I there second. Letter C there is going to get a little bit more complex, but that's okay, just slightly. We're going to have an extra step in here now. So you got the square root of -18 here is square root of -1 times the square root of 18. Well, the square root of -1 there is I. And square root of 18 can be broken down. I can't actually find a square root of 18 on my calculator and get an exact value. I can get an approximation, but I can't get an exact value. So I'm going to break down 18 as 9 times 2. Square root of 9 there is 3. I still have I. And I still have the square root of 2 because I can't find the square root of 2 there. So I did not choose to break down as 18 as 6 times 3, notice, because you can't find the square root of 6 and you can't find the square root of 3. So we're going to leave those we're going to think of something that we can actually find the square root of, like 9. We can find the square root of that. So 9 times 2 does give me 18. All right, so let's look at our next one here. We got the square root of -20. The square root of -20 can be broken down as the square root of -1 times the square root of 20. But we can't find the square root of 20 there, but we can find the square root of -1. It's I. So let's see if we can break down the square root of 20 into something. What times what gives me 20 that I actually can find the square root of? Oh yeah, 4 times 5. I can find the square root of 4. So I'm going to choose 4, square root of 4 times square root of 5. I did not choose something like 2 times 10 because I can't find the square root of 2 and I can't find the square root of 10 nicely. So I'm going to always try to figure out if I can break it down to something I actually can find the square root of. So square root of 4 there is 2. So I get 2I times the square root of 5. And then letter E here. How do I find the square root of -50? I can take the square root of -1 times the square root of 50. I can find the square root of -1 there. It's I. Square root of 50, I'm going to break that up down. So I got to think what times what gives me 50 that I actually can find the square root of. Oh yeah, 25 and 2. 25 times 2 is 50. And I can find the square root of 25. It is 5, and I still have the I. And I have a square root of 2 left because I can't find the square root of 2 nicely. So that's simplifying those and breaking those down. So an imaginary number, any number that can be written in the form of a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers and b is not equal to 0. So complex numbers is a set containing all real numbers and imaginary numbers. So it's a bigger set. Usually we're just talking about real numbers, those that we can graph out. But now we're talking about a bigger set, complex numbers. That contains all the I values, the imaginary numbers, and it contains all the real numbers that we know when we graph things out with. So let's simplify each expression here. So now in this next section, we're starting to think about, oh, we can add i's together, we can subtract i's, and we can multiply i's. So those are the ones we're going to be looking at today. So looking at letter A here, it says 4 plus 3i plus negative 4 plus 3i. So the only thing with addition here is you just got to go ahead and just combine your like terms. So if I move them by each other, I will see that which ones I can combine here. So I just move the like terms. I can rearrange these. With addition here, I don't have to, the parentheses don't really mean anything in here. So it's not a FOIL problem. Notice there's an addition sign between them. So we can get rid of the parentheses here and that are around the original problems there, and then just go ahead and combine the like terms. So 4 plus a negative 4 gives me 0. Negative 3i plus 3i gives me 0i. And 0 plus 0i just gives me 0. So it all canceled out. Subtraction here, the part you have to be aware of that is you're going to have to distribute that minus sign through the parentheses there. So I'm going to rewrite the first one down exactly the way it is, except without the parentheses there. And then the second portion there, I'm going to distribute that minus sign. So I've got a minus a negative 2 gives me a plus 2. And I've got a minus a positive 4i gives me a minus 4i. I'm just going to now combine my like terms. My like terms, 5 plus 2 here gives me 7, going with a sign in front of it. And then I've got a minus 3i and a minus 4i. A minus 3i minus a 4i gives me a minus 7i. So there I have it, 7 minus 7i. All I did was combine my like terms. 5 plus 2, 7. Negative 3i minus 4i, negative 7i. And then letter C here, this is 3i times, in parentheses, negative 5 plus 2i. So I have to distribute that 3i through the parentheses here. I get a negative 15i plus 6i squared. But every single time I see an I squared, I'm going to flip this back on our notes here. If you remember from our very beginning, I squared there has a value of a negative 1. So I squared equals negative 1. So I can replace that I squared there in my answer there with a negative 1. So I'm going to do that. So really I get negative 15i minus 6. And then I'm just going to put it in the right form. Remember, it's always an a plus bi form. That's what we said at the very top up here. A plus bi. So this I is written second. So you get negative 6 minus 15i as my solution. And then we just have some FOILing problems here. This is 4 plus 3i times negative 1 minus 2i. Notice there's not a subtraction sign or an addition sign in between the two parentheses. There's a multiplication. You're multiplying those, so we have to FOIL it out. So I have to take 4 and I have to multiply by everything over here. So I'm going to do that. I get negative 4 and then minus 8i. And then I'm going to do my 3i. I'm going to multiply that by everything over there. And so I get a minus 3i minus 6i squared. So I'm going to combine my like terms in here. Negative 8i minus 3i gives me minus 11i. And then I'm going to replace, I've got the I squared there equals negative 1. I'm going to replace that I squared there with negative 1. So cleaning up that still, I got a minus over becomes a plus. Combine my like terms, and negative 4 plus 6 here is 2, minus 11i. Notice again, I want my answers in a plus bi form. So I do have, I've got my real part first, and then I've got my imaginary part next. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with letter E there. It's a multiplication problem. I got to take negative 6, multiply by everything over there. Negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. I've got negative 6 times a minus I here gives me a plus 6i. And then I'm going to go ahead and take I times everything over here. So I times a negative 6 is a minus 6i. I times a negative 1 here, or negative I there, negative I. I times the negative I there is a negative I squared. I wrote over the top of it, so I had a hard time seeing it there. There. Now you can see it. So I times a minus I gives me a minus I squared. Combining my like terms there, I get 36 plus 6i minus 6i just gives me 0i, which just goes away, and then I still have this minus I squared. So I squared there, we know it has a value up there of negative 1. So I'm going to replace that I squared there with negative 1. And so I got 36 minus a negative 1 becomes 36 plus 1. And 36 plus 1 just gives me 37. So there it is. You don't need to put down plus 0i unless you really want to. But there it is, 37. Yeah, so we're going to stop there for now and have you work on some of that 4-7 worksheet.